The first thing Mike Tyson did as a free man was visit a grave. He stayed there until
What they don't know is the bullshit, the drama, the guns, the
weightlifting, a door opening, a new beginning. But when the gates of the Indiana Youth Center opened at 6:15 a.m. on the 25th of March 1995, Mike Tyson felt nothing. Just emptiness, where something else should have been. 3 years had changed him. He was leaner now, harder, his eyes carrying a weight that hadn't been there before. Prison had stripped away the excess, the entourage, the luxury, the illusions, and left something rawer behind. He walked out a free man for the first time in 3 years. Cameras flashed from every direction. Reporters shouted questions over each other. A wall of noise that felt more like an assault than a welcome. A convoy of black vehicles waited to whisk him away to whatever came next: interviews, press conferences, the machinery of his comeback already grinding into motion. But Mike had other plans. Plans that nobody knew about. Plans that would take him somewhere no camera could follow. Plans that had been forming in his mind for 1,095 days, through every sleepless night and every endless afternoon in his cell. The limousine was supposed to take him to Indianapolis, where a private jet waited to fly him back to his life, back to the mansions and the entourage and the millions of dollars that had accumulated while he sat in a cell. Back to boxing, where promoters were already counting the money his return would generate. Mike sat in the back seat, watching Indiana scroll past the tinted windows, fields, and farmhouses, small towns and gas stations, the ordinary world that had continued without him for 1,095 days. His manager sat across from him, talking about schedules and contracts and opportunities. Mike wasn't listening. He was thinking about something else entirely. "Stop the car," Mike said suddenly. The manager paused mid-sentence. "What?" "Stop the car. I need to make a detour." "Mike, we have a schedule. The jet is waiting. There are people." I said, "Stop the car." Something in Mike's voice made the manager go quiet. He had known Mike for years, had seen him in every possible state, but this was different. This wasn't anger or frustration. This was something deeper, something that didn't invite argument. The limousine pulled over. Mike gave the driver an address, a place in Catskill, New York, a place that would add 6 hours to their journey. "Mike, that's completely out of the way. We can't just—" "You can take the jet. I'll find my own way back." The manager started to protest, then stopped. He looked at Mike's face, the set of his jaw, the distance in his eyes, and understood that this wasn't a negotiation. "What's in Catskill?" he asked quietly. Mike didn't answer. He just stared out the window at the fields rolling past, seeing something that wasn't there. They arrived at the cemetery as the sun was beginning to set. It was a small place called Catskill Cemetery, tucked into the hills outside town. Old headstones leaned at angles, their inscriptions worn smooth by decades of weather. Trees lined the perimeter, their branches bare in the late March cold, reaching toward the sky like skeletal fingers. The grass was brown, waiting for spring to bring it back to life. A wrought iron fence surrounded the property, its black paint peeling in places. There were no other visitors, no groundskeepers, no sounds except the wind and the distant call of birds settling in for the night. Mike got out of the limousine alone. He told the driver to leave, to come back in the morning. The driver looked uncertain. Leaving a client alone in a cemetery overnight wasn't exactly standard procedure, but Mike's expression left no room for discussion. "I'll be fine," Mike said. "I need this." The limousine pulled away. The sound of its engine faded into the distance, leaving behind a silence so complete it felt like a physical presence. And then Mike Tyson was alone. Truly alone, for the first time in 3 years. No guards, no inmates, no cameras or reporters or managers or handlers. Just him and the fading light and the rows of silent headstones stretching out before him. He walked slowly through the cemetery, his footsteps crunching on the gravel path. He knew exactly where he was going. He had been here before, years ago, though the memory felt like it belonged to a different person entirely. The headstone was simple. Gray granite, modestly sized, nothing that would suggest the man buried beneath it had shaped champions and changed lives. Just a name, 2 dates, and a short inscription. Cus D'Amato, 1908 to 1985. A teacher affects eternity. He can never tell where his influence stops. Mike stood before the grave and felt something crack open inside his chest. What do you say to a dead man who gave you everything? Mike had rehearsed this moment in his cell. During the endless nights when sleep wouldn't come, when the walls closed in and the silence became deafening, he had imagined what he would say when he finally stood here again. But now that the moment had arrived, the words wouldn't come. They stuck in his throat, tangled up with grief and guilt and 100 other emotions he had never learned how to express. He sat down on the cold ground in front of the headstone. The grass was damp, soaking through his expensive suit, but he didn't care. He had worn worse in worse places. "Hey, Cus," he said finally. His voice sounded strange in the silence, rough, uncertain, like a machine that hadn't been used in too long. "I'm out. I made it." The headstone didn't respond. The wind moved through the bare branches above, making a sound like whispered secrets. "I know you're probably disappointed in me. The things I did, the way I ended up, that wasn't what you taught me. That wasn't the plan." Mike's voice cracked. He paused, swallowed hard, forced himself to continue. "You used to tell me that discipline was everything. That a man without discipline was just an animal with clever hands. I forgot that, Cus. Somewhere along the way, I forgot everything you taught me." The sun continued to set. Orange and purple painted the sky, then faded to deep blue, then black. Stars emerged, one by one, then by the hundreds, spread across the darkness like scattered diamonds. Mike didn't move. He sat in front of that headstone as night fell around him, talking to a man who had been dead for almost 10 years. Sometimes the words came in floods, memories and confessions, and questions that would never be answered. Sometimes the words stopped entirely, and he just sat in silence, feeling the cold seep into his bones. He talked about prison, about the cell that measured 8 feet by 10 feet, about the routine that never changed, about the violence that lurked in every shadow, about the nights when he had wondered if he would ever see the outside world again. He talked about the trial, about the accusations and the testimony, and the moment when the verdict came down, and he understood that his life as he knew it was over. About the people who had abandoned him, the friends who had disappeared, the empire that had crumbled while he sat helpless behind bars. He talked about the things he couldn't talk about to anyone else. The fear, the loneliness, the moments when the weight of it all became so heavy that he couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything except curl up on his bunk and wait for the feeling to pass. "I needed you, Cus," he said, his voice barely a whisper now. "Every day in there, I needed you, and you weren't there. You left me alone, and I didn't know how to be alone." The accusation hung in the air, unfair, irrational, directed at a man who had died of pneumonia years before Mike's world fell apart. But grief doesn't care about fairness. Grief takes what it needs and leaves wreckage behind. "I know it's not your fault," Mike continued, softer now. "You didn't choose to leave. But I was so angry at you for so long, angry that you made me believe I could be something, then left before I figured out how to be it without you." The hours passed. The temperature dropped. Mike's breath formed clouds in the cold air, and his body began to shake, but still he didn't move. Somewhere around midnight, the tears finally came. His breath formed clouds in the freezing air. His fingers had gone numb hours ago, but he didn't move, didn't seek shelter. The cold felt right. It felt like penance. They came silently at first, just moisture tracking down his cheeks, invisible in the darkness. Then they came harder, his shoulders shaking, his breath catching in ragged sobs that he couldn't control and didn't try to. Mike Tyson, the baddest man on the planet, sat in a cemetery in the middle of the night and cried like the broken child he had never stopped being. He cried for Cus, who had saved him and believed in him, and died too soon. He cried for himself, for the years he had wasted and the opportunities he had squandered. He cried for the boy from Brownsville who had never learned how to trust anyone, who had pushed away everyone who tried to get close, who had turned his gifts into weapons and his weapons against himself. He cried until there was nothing left, until his body was empty and his mind was quiet, and the only sound was the wind moving through the bare trees. And then, finally, he began to talk again, but differently this time. Not accusations or confessions, something else. "I'm going to come back, Cus. I'm going to fight again, win the title again, prove that everything you saw in me was real." His voice was steadier now. The tears had washed something away, some blockage that had been building for years. "But I'm going to do it differently this time. No more chaos, no more destruction. I'm going to remember what you taught me: discipline, control, using my power instead of being used by it." He reached out and placed his palm flat against the cold granite of the headstone. The stone was rough under his fingers, real in a way that nothing had felt real for a very long time. "I don't know if you can hear me. I don't know if any of this matters. But I needed to come here. I needed to tell you that I'm sorry, and I'm grateful, and I'm going to try to be the man you believed I could be." He paused, searching for the right words. "You saved my life, Cus. Not just once over and over. Every lesson you taught me, every time you believed in me when nobody else did, every moment you spent turning a criminal into a champion. You saved my life." His voice dropped to barely a whisper. "I'm going to try to deserve it this time." The sun rose slowly, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The cemetery transformed in the growing light, no longer a dark, haunted place, but something peaceful, quiet. A place where the dead rested and the living came to remember. Mike watched the sun rise from where he sat. His suit was ruined, covered in dirt and grass stains and damp from the long night. His body was stiff and cold, his joints aching from hours of sitting on the hard ground. But something else had changed. Something inside him. The weight that had been pressing on his chest for 3 years, for longer than that, if he was honest, had lifted slightly, not disappeared entirely. That would take more than one night in a cemetery. But shifted, redistributed, made bearable in a way it hadn't been before. He stood slowly, his legs protesting the movement. He looked down at the headstone one more time. "I'll come back," he said. "I'll come back and tell you how it goes. Every fight, every victory, every time I remember what you taught me, I'll come back and tell you." He reached down and touched the top of the headstone, a gesture of farewell that was also a promise. Then Mike Tyson turned and walked out of the cemetery, into the morning light, toward whatever came next. The limousine was waiting at the gates, just as he had instructed. The driver's eyes widened when he saw Mike's suit ruined, face streaked with dried tears, looking like a man who had fought a battle no one else could see. But he said nothing, just opened the door and waited. Mike got in without a word. His manager wasn't there, had taken the jet as Mike had suggested. It was just Mike and the driver and the long road ahead. "Where to?" the driver asked. Mike thought about it. The mansion in Ohio, the training camp in Vegas, the dozens of people who were waiting to help him spend his money and rebuild his career. "Home," he said finally. Then he smiled slightly, realizing how strange that word sounded. He didn't really have a home, hadn't had one since Cus died. But maybe that was something he could build, not a house or a mansion, something else, something more important. The limousine pulled away from the cemetery. Mike watched through the rear window as the gates receded into the distance. "Goodbye, Cus," he murmured. "Thank you for everything." Mike Tyson would go on to reclaim the heavyweight championship. He would fight some of the greatest battles of his career in the years that followed. He would also stumble, fall, make mistakes that would haunt him for decades. But he never forgot that night in the cemetery. Never forgot the conversation he had with a headstone in the dark, the tears he shed, the promises he made. Years later, when interviewers asked about his lowest moments, Mike would sometimes mention prison, the isolation, the despair, the feeling that his life was over. But he would also mention the night that came after. The night he spent alone with the only father he had ever known. The night he said goodbye and hello at the same time. "That night saved me," he said once. "Not the money that was waiting for me, not the fame or the comeback or any of that. Just sitting in a cemetery, talking to a dead man, finally saying the things I should have said when he was alive." He paused, the memory visible in his eyes. "Cus taught me how to fight. But that night, I finally started learning how to live."